We're now live at TEDx Beacon Street, and sitting next to me is Armando Carbonell. He's the chair of the Urban Planning Department at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Welcome, Armando.
Thanks so much, Connie. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here as well. So you just got off the stage, gave us a fantastic talk. Could you tell us a little about what you talk about?
The talk is really about scenario planning, which is a very particular method of thinking about the future and helping people to test their plans against plausible future conditions that might affect outcomes. In the talk, I go all the way back to the early 1960s when a man named Herman Kahn wrote a book called Thinking About the Unthinkable, really about nuclear gamesmanship back in the Cold War, and developed tools called scenarios that were aids to thinking about things that were very difficult to think about. I then talked about a business application scenarios by the Royal Dutch Shell Company in the 70s, and then moved forward to the mid-1980s when I was the director of the planning agency on Cape Cod. And we use scenarios as a way of bringing people together to think about the future and to actually create an agenda for action based on 60 key outcomes that we developed through a process of working with the public. And that actually ended up in those outcomes coming through, which is good when plans come through. But it also, I think, exposes some of the weaknesses of the vision plan, which is based on aspiration and the planner promising to deliver what people think they want to have, because there are things that are just not predictable and are out of the control of planners. So that was, 1985, more than 30 years ago. Now when we do scenario planning, we're very often using it to explore possible futures based on uncertain conditions. And the place where this has come to the fore is climate change. We really can't say, for example, whether the sea level is going to rise 2 feet, 4 feet, or 6 feet. We go into the next century, or catastrophically 20 feet. And if we assume that we can predict and we decide we're going to select a number and it turns out to be wrong, which is perfectly likely right now, then we may have many regrets if we build our buildings in the wrong places or not tall enough and so forth. So scenario planning gives us a tool that permits us to consider a whole range of plausible outcomes, not necessarily the things that we want to have happen, not necessarily the things that we think are most likely to happen, but things that could happen, and if they did happen, would very much affect the result of our plans. And if we take them into account, it's very possible that we'll have plans that are more resilient and that we have fewer regrets. Now, I also made the point that while climate change is exceptionally good application of scenario planning, there is uncertainty in our lives in many aspects. And of late, it seems increasingly that we're not able to predict political outcomes very, very well. So I talked a little bit about the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom back in June, and this was a vote that surprised everybody, including the proponents of leaving the European Union when the vote actually passed. As a result of not having anticipated this, even the leaders of the Brexit movement seem to be in complete disarray. Prime ministers and potential prime ministers thrown by the wayside, and as a result, chaos in the economy, upheaval in the financial markets, the pound is sunk, so huge consequences. When I was in London right after the vote in June, I met with senior policy analysts with the Royal Town Planning Institute, and none of those in the meeting had considered a scenario where this vote would pass. As a result, nobody knew what to think about what to do next. So we're actually going back to London in a couple of weeks to meet with a similar group of people from all around the United Kingdom to think about the world after Brexit and whether there aren't ways in which we can't use scenarios to think about the future that now is unfolding. Might have been good to do this before the vote, but hindsight.
I see. And thank you for the insights. I mean, what you mentioned this concept of scenario planning. Can we say is that that's core methodology to make predictions or assumptions, and how does it take into consideration of uncertainty?
So it is a tool to look at the future, but it's different than the kind of projection that planners normally would do. For example, say the population grew by so much between the last 10 years. So in the next 10 years, we're going to believe it's going to grow by a similar amount and try to predict what the future population will be. This approach steps back and says, well, wait a minute, there are a lot of factors that could influence how much population grows, economic factors, migration factors, things that we don't really know about. Let's pick a number of numbers that are plausible for the rate of population growth, and let's see how our plans look if the high number comes in or the low number comes in or another number comes in, and and not say, well, we like this number, or we prefer this number, but we have considered it, and potentially we can anticipate what might happen if indeed it comes true. So it's a conditional way of thinking about the future. And another aspect of it that I didn't go into in the talk for lack of time is that it works best when you bring people together with different perspectives, different points of view, who can share insights that otherwise might not be part of the conventional wisdom, because we do have a tendency to live within our own comfort zone when it comes to the future. And as we've seen in a number of recent outcomes, this can lead us to very much not anticipating the future and being left in a state of shock. So
And so you're proposing that people from different fields to come together to make a decision,
I think
not just urban planners.
exactly, and not even just people with different kinds of expertise, but people who have different political agendas, people who have different values, because it's a way for people who don't necessarily agree to talk in a comfortable way about possible future. So just take climate change, for example. There are people who do not accept that climate change is happening or that it's caused by human activities. You can actually bring people who are climate deniers into a room with people who are climate scientists and talk about the possibility that there will be a drought, or the possibility that the sea level will rise, or there will be a flood, and think about not do you believe it will happen, do you agree with the scientific explanation for it, but do you at least accept that it's plausible that it might happen, and if it just happened to happen, would you be prepared for it? Is your plan resilient to that? So it is a possibly way to have a conversation that would otherwise not be comfortable with people who don't agree.
Absolutely. And in your work, from your experience, how many of those conversations have already been happening? If not, what are the challenges that lie in the way?
They're happening increasingly. The methods of scenario planning have tended to be fairly elaborate in terms of the amount of time it takes to go through a plan, the kinds of experts you need to bring in, and it gets expensive. So what we've been trying to do is work with both planners and software developers to develop tools that are more accessible, that are available to everybody freely on the web, open access, open source, that will improve the process, but also working in communities to see if we can't make it easier for people to use this technique. For me, it's the kind of thing you could use in everyday life. When you wake up in the morning, there are a lot of things you're not sure about. You make certain plans based on contingencies, possibilities. And I think a small town could do this, big region, a big city. There are a lot of applications. And as I mentioned, even in the world of politics, there might be ways to think about the future outside of what we believe to be the coming result, and imagine some other possibilities so that we're prepared for them.
Absolutely. And you're very much, it's a method for us to think the alternative instead of
Exactly.
being focused.
And that's why I call it thinking about the thinkable. These are things that are perfectly tangible, real, possible things, but we have a tendency to reject them and not consider them and make.
And what would you say to the people so that they're convinced that I need to take into consideration of other possibilities?
Well, I think, one example, I like the Royal Dutch Shell story, because here's a company that ran scenarios back in the early 1970s, to consider different market conditions in the petroleum field, their business. And they happened to run scenarios that looked at what would happen if there were an oil embargo, what would happen if the oil producing cartel decided to affect global markets, leading to an energy crisis. How would that affect Shell's business? And and then it happened in 1973, and it threw the world economy into crisis. Uh, I talked about Jimmy Carter in the White House and his president wearing a warm sweater like this because it was too cold. They couldn't heat on. So Shell had run that scenario, and the sort of legends of the company and of scenario planning have it, they actually did very, very well during the oil crisis because they were prepared. So that would be an argument to consider it. And the other, I'd say, just as a practical matter, is if you're dealing with something like climate change, where the range of possibilities is really very great, it really is important to consider some of the outlier possibilities because they could have devastating effects. So it's not to say you always plan for the worst. That's not the right idea, but you should have plans that are resilient. You should think about having options and ways of dealing with a range of conditions. And the whole point is to not regret your choice, not to make the wrong plan.
Absolutely. And say with this method and methodology, 5 years or 10 years down the road, what would be your hope to see it's being used or being?
We're trying to get folks in the planning field to use it more because we think it's a useful technique. And we understand there have been barriers to that, and we're really trying to break down those barriers. We're trying to make it more accessible. We're trying to put the tools out in a way that makes them easy for people to acquire and use. And we're trying to make it easier for people to kind of do this on their own without necessarily lots of, expensive consultants and so forth. So we're trying to simplify the process. Not to say that consultants don't provide a lot of useful help in this, and indeed they may be essential in complicated cases, as our experts who can help you to understand some of the driving forces of change that affect how.
And say what are the challenges that lies ahead for the public to accept or for the planning realm to accept such a
I
methodology?
think the biggest challenge is the difficulty of accepting uncertainty. And I've wrestled with it myself. When I started working on climate change planning, I went to engineers, climate scientists, and experts, and I said, well, just tell us, how high the water is going to be, and then we can build the right city. And they said, you don't understand. We can't tell you how high the water is going to be. It's fundamentally not possible to do that. There is essential uncertainty in climate, and a lot of it has to do with what happened last year or 100 years ago no longer applies to what will happen in a year or 100 years in the future. The climate is no longer stationary, it is no longer predictable, and that's a very hard thing for me and other people to accept. You like the idea that you can get a pretty good estimate from an expert on what's needed and then just do it. So I started with a very simple view of the world, and I've now come around to accepting the world is just not going to behave that way for us. So we have to plan uh, with uncertainty, for uncertainty, not believe we're going to eliminate uncertainty.
But at the end of the day, we still gotta build our city planet.
We still have to make decisions, and the question is, will we make decisions that we regret because they have very unfortunate results, or will we say, boy, that was pretty smart, I'm glad I added 2 feet to that because, uh, the transmission, there are all sorts of utilities, for example, which you could pretty easily build taller so they don't flood. And in some recent cases where that's been done in a very good anticipatory way, people have felt very smart because in Sandy, for example, some of these facilities survived nicely when they might have been knocked out.
So for the general public who are interested in learning about this approach, scenario planning, where can we find more information?
We're continuing to do a great deal of work at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy on scenario planning. We have a lot of material that's available for free download for people who might want to check with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Armando. And if you want to check out Armando's full talk, please go to TEDxBeaconstreet.com.
Thank you.